Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Novelists Unwind. I'm here with Amanda Barratt. She's an ECPA bestselling author, and her latest novel is My Dearest Dietrich, a novel of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Lost Love. So we're going to talk about that and about Amanda's other writing and her writing journey. Amanda, I'd love to see the copy of the book. I know you have it with you, so if you could show everyone what it looks like and just tell us what inspired you to write about Dietrich Bonhoeffer and who he is for those who might not know.
It's so great to be here. This is such a joy and honor.
Thank you.
So, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German pastor and theologian during World War II, because of his deep faith in God, determined that he had to take action against the government and against Hitler's regime. And that action led to him becoming involved in the plots to assassinate Hitler. That action led to his eventual arrest and imprisonment and his execution at Flossenburg concentration camp in April of 1945, mere weeks before the war ended. And so when I first heard Dietrich's story, I was deeply moved by the idea of a German pastor taking action against the regime. But I wasn't inspired to write his story until a few months later when I came across a quote from a book called Love Letters from Cell 92, which is the correspondence that Dietrich and Maria exchanged during their relationship. And when I heard that Dietrich Bonhoeffer, this man I knew as pastor, martyr, prophet, spy, a la the Eric Metaxas book, I thought he had a fiance, he was engaged. And so I wanted to discover her, because we know so much about him, but we know so little about her. And I wondered why. And the more I researched, the more I realized her story was just so beautiful and profound and deserved to be told right alongside his. And so that's what, after a lot of prayer and seeking, I eventually came to do through the writing of My Dearest Dietrich.
Oh, I love that. I love that you said, through prayer and seeking that you decided to write it. So you mentioned, how do you pronounce his last name? Eric Metaxas, is that right?
Yes,
Metaxas,
yes.
Bonhoeffer. So this, you all can see, this is a thick, thick book. And I got this when it first came out and read it and did a review for Thomas Nelson, I believe. Yeah. And so I've been interested in Bonhoeffer too for a long time. And when I first heard, or somehow came across that you were writing this book or had written this book, and before it had come out, I thought, oh my gosh, that is so cool. And I wish I had thought of doing that. And then when the book came out and I read your acknowledgments, I always read the acknowledgments in people's books. And I thought, Amanda was just the perfect person to write this story. I mean, there's just so many little things you say in your acknowledgments about your mom had read the book and mentioned it to you. Your dad had taken you to World War II museums and that kind of thing. So it was just like so cool. And then for y'all who might not know, Amanda has been on national news. I mean, she's had, all this media coverage for her book. And then I was really glad that it was you and not me. I don't know that I could have done that. But so much I want to talk about in just a short amount of time. But tell us about, about that, about, just how you steeped yourself into this history and like the story. Please tell us about the story about Skyping with someone for 9 hours. Maybe that's a good place to start.
Oh, yes. Well, so the research for this story was intense. It took about 3 years, though everything I've written was always historical. This story was taking historical to a new level because it was about these real people. And I felt this huge responsibility to tell their story in truth. And that really, to me, meant digging to the heart of who they were, because we know Bonhoeffer and he's known as a martyr. And so I think sometimes we tend to place him on a pedestal. And I wanted to dig deeper and discover the man behind that image, and, that he struggled and fell in love and fought falling in love in the midst of doing and being, this great man that we know him to be. And so the research I started with the biographies and the letters that Bonhoeffer and Maria exchanged in the book Love Letters from Cell 92. And that was really my foundation for learning about Maria, was through those love letters. And they have this really great, her sister published the book after Maria's death. And so there's this wonderful commentary in there. And then I dug even deeper, and I came across really interesting things like interviews with Bonhoeffer's sister in Nice at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in their archives, online archives. So I was able to watch those, and I came across a really wonderful interview that Maria did in 1974 for Malcolm Muggeridge's documentary, A Third Testament. And she was a very reticent woman in the years following Dietrich's death. She moved to America and had a very successful career there, but she did agree to sit down with Malcolm Muggeridge in this interview, and she lived in Boston at the time. And so I was able to hear what she had to say about her relationship with Dietrich, and just the deep emotion in her voice as she shared what it was like to walk to Flossenburg concentration camp. She walked 7 kilometers on foot, carrying a suitcase full of clean clothes and food for Dietrich, only to arrive there and say they had no word of him, because this was in February and he didn't get there until April. He was only there for about less than 24 hours before he was executed. And so that was that. And then also the Skype call was super fun, because there wasn't a lot about Maria. So I wanted to mine everything that I could get about her. And I came across this little book, about 90 pages, that was actually written in German about Dietrich and Maria. And so I was thinking about how I could get this information outside of putting the whole thing into Google Translate, which would have been a huge job.
Oh, wow.
And so I did that. So what I did is I got it on I put a call out on Facebook saying, does anyone speak German? I'm looking to get this book translated. And a friend of mine, her daughter, had lived in Austria for several years and was now a French and German teacher. And so this was a good friend of mine, and her daughter. So her daughter got on Skype with me. I mailed her the book, and she read it to me. And it took like 9 hours, because it was not the easiest German to read. It was like a very, I guess there's different kinds of German, and it was a difficult kind. And so but she read it to me, and it was amazing. Through reading that book, I got the final scene for My Dearest Dietrich. There was some great stuff in there. So that was one of those things that it was an investment of time, but I was so glad I did it, and so glad that I had her, her being willing to read that for me and help me out with that.
Oh, that's just amazing. I mean, I love that, just the depth of that research, and really, like you said, digging deep into their stories to make them real people. And you do that in the book. So that what you talked about, her walking to that one camp. I mean, that's how you begin the book, and then we sort of go flashback, and it's just beautifully written. One thing that was in there, and I wondered if this was true, because we do, as novelists, we do get to take a little bit of artistic license, right? I love the scene where she talks about running in the rain, and has him, because he's 36, or about that. He's older. She's like 18, and he's academic, and she's kind of this more little free spirit. The whole part about running in the rain, was that you, or was that real?
So the running in the rain scene where they ran in the rain, that was me, but it was totally true to their personalities. Maria, she was, in many ways, she was very comparable to Dietrich, but in other ways, she was his complete opposite. She wrote in one of the letters that she didn't know if they would be if he knew what he was really getting into, becoming engaged to her, because she was the kind of person who would go on late night walks with the dog, who would smoke a cigarette because she never smoked one before, and she wanted to know what it was like, who would put on music and dance around their house. And so she was this incredibly vivacious, vibrant young woman who, though, was also a very deeply intellectual woman as well, and really, very much his equal and heads and shoulders above what most young women of 18 today are intellectually. So, but the running in the rain was me, and I think it really was very true to both of their personalities, though, that she really did change him, and she showed him how to look at the world in a different way.
I love it. I just thought it was just a great little picture of like you said, their differences, and yet how she's bringing him into her world, and that's just, it was just a beautiful little moment. So yeah, that was great. Tell us about your tour with the book. I mean, I know that you've been on different Eric Metaxas show, and I have seen an episode of his show. He is one smart guy, and just, it's just, I forget who he was interviewing when I was watching it, but I was like spellbound, these two men just talking about these very deep concepts. Were you intimidated at all, or were you just, how do you prepare for something like that? And I'm not sure I know you've been on other interviews too. Just tell us a little bit about that, if you could.
Yes. So I was such a an honor and a total joy to be able to be interviewed with Eric, because that was something that, as you know, as I researched, his book was really my favorite research source. It's just a really good look at Bonhoeffer, because the really famous Bonhoeffer biography is the one by Eberhard Bethke, Bonhoeffer's best friend, and it's over 1,000 pages long, and it's really wonderful, but it's very academic in style. And so Eric's just really brought Bonhoeffer to the modern reader, and it's just in really personal way. And so I was really honored to be able to be on his show, to meet him. But yeah, I was really intimidated, because I've been a fan of his, not just of his work on Bonhoeffer, but of his work on, he wrote the other biography about William Wilberforce, and then I listened to his radio show and things. So it was amazing, though. He is deeply one of the most intelligent people I've ever been privileged to have a conversation with, and I really could have talked to him for hours about more things than just Bonhoeffer, because he's just so brilliant. He's really charismatic, and I love his show. I'm a huge fan of it. And so to me, I loved being able to talk to him, because we were both people, we both really had a deep love and admiration for Bonhoeffer. So that really came out, I think, in our interview. And then I was I did do a couple other New York media things. I was on the Todd Starnes show on Fox Nation, and then I did Guidepost magazine. I was able to have something in there as well, through my New York tour, it was amazing. And it was totally outside of my comfort zone, because I am an introvert. I mean, that's why I write, because I can get with these fictional people in my office, and I don't have to, and I can just get involved in their world. So
Right.
I think a lot of writers are like that. But God just showed up so faithfully and just giving me the strength to do it all. And so I was just totally, to be able to share Dietrich and Maria's story with that audience was just truly a deep blessing to me.
Oh, that's so exciting. Was that your first trip to New York? Had you been there before?
No, it was my very first trip. So I did a lot of sightseeing. I did the Staten Island Ferry. I went to, at that time, and they still have the Auschwitz exhibit at the Holocaust, the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City. So I toured that. I was so excited that I was there, and it coincided with when that was going to be open, because that was something I'd heard about before I knew I was going to go to New York. So that was really amazing to be able to go see. And then the New York food is great. I mean, we went to the oldest pizza place in New York City at Marty's, I think it's called, and then New York cheesecake.
I love New York. I've only been there a couple of times, but I love it.
Oh yes.
That is so exciting. So exciting. Well, I just love the book, and I'm just, really glad that God chose you to write it. I really, again, just thought that, reading the acknowledgments and even talking to you now, that you're just the perfect person to dig into this and really get into it and tell such a great story. But let's also talk about some of your other books. You write several novellas for Barber, and in fact, Amanda and I are going to be in the same novella collection that comes out in January, Homefront Heroine. So we'll put a little plug in for it real quick with two other authors, Rita Gerlach and Laura Lee Bliss. So we're really excited about that coming out. And you've also written a novel called My Heart Belongs in Niagara, New York. It's ADELE'S Journey. So was that your first novel? Was that your debut novel?
Yes, that was my debut novel, yes.
Would you like to talk about it for a minute? I mean, or about your writing journey, like your ups and downs, or how you got started? Well, I know how you got started. You wrote a spin-off of Jane Eyre when you were a child. I read that.
Oh yes, that came after watching a really long Jane Eyre miniseries. So I watched this 6-hour adaptation of Charlotte Bronte's, and it had Timothy Dalton, and he was Rochester, and I was, I think about, 8, 9, 10 years old, and I was just totally entranced by that. So I wrote something kind of similar, and that really was what getting into the classic authors like Charlotte Bronte, Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, that really was what spurred me on to start writing. And all my first books were all set, my first unpublished books were all set in England. And so My Heart Belongs in Niagara Falls, New York came out in 2018, and that one was a very interesting story to tell because it was set in late 1800s Niagara Falls, and it really delved into what was going on at the time as far as that Niagara Falls, New York was like the first big tourist thing. I mean, everybody honeymooned in Niagara Falls in that time. That was like, if you were fashionable, you went there. And so my story was about a young woman who was afraid her father had taken risks and her family had suffered for it. And then she meets a man who is currently involved in in a stunt to walk across Niagara Falls on a tightrope. And he's doing it to earn money for his sister who's in a wheelchair. He got involved with this entrepreneur businessman who's making this big promotional deal. And so they fall in love. And it was a really fun story to write. I love delving into all of that history. That part of American history, and just this couple who are kind of complete opposites, that yet who find each other and fall in love.
And the Niagara Falls story, I mean, it in itself is so amazing. There's a book, and I meant to look it up before we went on air so I can tell you what the name of it is. But it talks about the guys and the women too, who would go down the barrels, and about how dangerous that was. And yet there was this whole economy of people that made their living pulling corpses out of the river. I mean, that was like their job, and they got so much money for doing that, because there were not only these daredevil type people, but also people jumping into the river, which is just sad. Really, it's very interesting just to read about that whole history of that daredevilish time and people seeking risks and all that kind of thing. Wow. Okay, well, more lighthearted though. This sounds like that's a much more lighthearted story than the Dietrich story. So. What do you do for
Yes.
Yeah. What do you do for fun when you're not writing?
So I love spending time with my family. I love reading. I think reading is something that as authors that we really have to be intentional about doing. And although we love doing it, sometimes other things can get in the way of doing it. And so I love really sitting down with a good book and reading. I love cooking, baking in the kitchen. Haven't been doing as much of that lately as I would like to, but following apples and things like that. So I also love when I'm writing something, getting like, if there's like for Dietrich example, I've got a lot of German recipes and made some German stuff just to kind of get a feel for what they would have had. Although the things I was making, I mean, My Dearest Dietrich is set during rationing, so they wouldn't have had the nice things, but it was still just a kind of cool feel of, Apfelkuchen and Apfelstrudel and things like that. And I also love British miniseries and shows. I love, that's one of my favorite things to do, both adaptations of classic books, and then I also love watching old black and white movies, like things with, Katharine Hepburn and Clark Gable and those. So that's what with our Homefront novella.
Cary Grant. I mean, yeah, I love Cary Grant movies. Oh my gosh, that's great. I love Dickens too. When you were talking about Dickens and Jane Austen earlier, it's like, oh yeah, Dickens. I'm crazy about him. What's next for you? How are you going to follow up Dietrich Bonhoeffer?
So my next story came to me as I was researching and writing My Dearest Dietrich. It's also set in World War II Germany. So for both those books, I've really been able to delve into the German whole experience during the war, because I think sometimes we tend to equate Germans with Nazis. That's a typical thing after hearing like the basic story of the Holocaust. But there were these Germans inside Germany who were taking risks, and my story tells the story of a group called the White Rose Resistance Group, and they were based in Munich, and they were college students. They were German college students, and they distributed leaflets across Germany that they were trying to open the eyes of the German people to what was going on. And they were eventually caught and arrested, and 5 days after their arrest, they were executed. And my story is told partly from the point of view of Sophie Scholl. She was 21 years old when she was executed, and her story was so compelling, and all of their stories were so compelling because they all had a deep faith in God. So they were doing this because they knew that as Christians they had to do something. And so I'm really excited to share that story. It's been another one of those deeply convicting stories to write, as I think about, they risked, and they knew that they very well could lose their lives, but yet they still did it. And so I'm so excited to share that one. It's coming out next summer, 2020, with Kriegel.
Oh, I will want to read that one too, because I know a little bit about their story as well from doing World War II research. And of course, they're mentioned in your current novel. And it is just so sad, these kids so young and yet so brave and so courageous. And one thing you write about is at the trial, her dad saying, you know, they'll go down in history. And it's like, yeah, they did. I mean, yeah, justice has come full circle for them. So they're regarded as
Yeah.
heroes instead of traitors. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, wow. That's deep. I mean, that really, really is. And I truly admire you for, you know, the research that you do, because you know, I've done research. I know how hard it is, and you just have taken it to a whole new level in your stories, and it's just wonderful. So one last question, I ask everybody this. When you hit the end, you type the words at the end of your novel, what do you do to unwind?
Usually I like to take like an evening off and just do like watch a favorite movie, spend time with my family. I also usually, my desk by then is a total mess, because it's like when I start a book, I'm usually really good about keeping my desk clean, because I know I have a long way to go. But the last couple weeks, my office starts to look like, you know, like a disaster zone. Like I need tape to tape it off because it gets so bad with papers and books everywhere. So I usually try to clean that up. And my inbox by that time is usually looking about that bad. So I do that too. But yeah, I like just to take an evening and celebrate with family, either, do something fun or just watch a movie, things like that. It's always a really great feeling. But then when I type the end, I always know, this story's far, far from done.
True. Yeah, because there's edits. Edits in the future, right? Yeah, and all kinds of other stuff. Well, that's been great. Amanda, it's been really great talking to you. Thank you so much. Please show us your book again, because I really want to encourage people to get a copy of it. It's just a wonderful love story from this man that we know as a hero, but we see him, like you said, more as the academic and more as the the pastor, but there's this whole human side to him that you've been able to bring out in your story. My Dearest Dietrich, thank you so much. Appreciate you being here.
It's been an absolute joy. Thank you so much, Johnnie.
Thank you too, and thanks everybody for watching. Join us again next time for another episode of Novelists Unwind. Bye bye.